You can come if you don't make it about you. That's what my mother said. After I found out I wasn't even on the guest list for my sister's wedding. No formal invite, no place card, not even a name on the seating chart. But I recognized my work on the banners, my logo on the napkins, and my words in Callista's speech. They used everything I gave and left me at the back door. I didn't confront them. I just stood there, wearing the dress I once sketched for our first pitch event. Silently invisible. If you've ever felt erased by your own family, but still expected to clap, drop a 1 in the comments. If you've never had to swallow that kind of betrayal, drop a 0, because some wounds don't scream. They present, in perfect cursive on someone else's wedding program. It wasn't a mistake. The invitation just never had my name on it. The morning light came in pale through the lace curtains, drawing trembling patterns on the kitchen floor. I stood by the counter, fingers wrapped around the chipped handle of my favorite mug, waiting for the slow drip of coffee to finish. The radio murmured a story about family-run wineries in the valley, voices soft and even, but I wasn't listening. My eyes were fixed on the envelope, pale blue, the kind Callista liked. Embossed lettering. My cousin Jenna's name in cursive, the address forwarding it to me, as if fate itself had hiccuped. I turned it over again, uselessly. There was no mistake, just intent. Jenna was always closer to Callista. I was the one who drifted, geographically and otherwise. Still, I half expected a second envelope beneath the first, one with my name on it, sealed in dignity. There wasn't. I poured the coffee into my mug slowly, letting the heat wrap around my fingers. The bitter scent rose like breath from something too tired to protest. NPR played on, now shifting to a segment about vineyard labor rights, something noble, something essential. I clicked it off. I reached for my phone before I could talk myself out of it. Mom answered on the third ring. "Oh, sweetie. Did the invite finally come?" Her voice was thin, like cellophane stretched too far. "It wasn't for me." "Well, Callista wanted to keep it small, just the core. But of course, you're welcome. Don't make it complicated." Complicated. That was her word for everything that didn't fit in neat lines. When I was 10, I helped with the school spring event. We sat at the kitchen table, Mom, Callista, and me. I had stayed up writing names on flyers in careful loops until my fingers cramped. The next morning, Callista had rewritten them all. Said her handwriting looked better. Said mine looked like a child's. Mom had agreed. That was the first time I felt myself fold into the wallpaper. There was another time, later, 7th grade. We had a small talent show, and Callista insisted we both sing. I wanted to back out, but Dad said, "Let her shine a little. She's better with crowds." He meant well, maybe. That night, she stood under the spotlight while I sat backstage holding her spare shoes. When the applause came, no one even remembered there was a second girl. Now I stood in a kitchen that still smelled like citrus cleaner and morning air. I stirred cream into my coffee out of habit, though I preferred it black. Something about ritual, about making it easier to pretend this day wasn't any different. I remembered Dad again, how he once helped me spell congratulations for a 5th grade banner. His voice low, almost shy, as he'd murmured, "Atta girl," the only time he ever said it. I clung to that echo like it had weight. Years later, when he was sick and fading, he still called Callista baby girl. I had been the strong one then. No nickname, just purpose. I thought about the wedding, about the seating charts I would never see, about Lucas, once a family friend who used to share my Oreos at recess. We'd lost touch after high school, but I'd heard he was officiating the ceremony. Of course. I hadn't RSP'd. I hadn't even decided if I would go. But one night, when the silence got too loud, I wrote to Simone, Callista's ever-efficient assistant. I said I might attend, just wanted to be sure I wouldn't cause disruption. Her reply came swift and sterile. You may enter through vendor access. Check in with hotel staff. Vendor access. I read the words 3 times, wondering if they knew what they meant. I imagined myself walking in with the florists, or the delivery crew, quietly sidestepping the guests I used to call cousins. The days crawled by. I stayed busy, sorting my bookcase, donating old linens, even trimming the lavender bush outside, though it wasn't overgrown. But the envelope stayed on the counter. Some mornings, I moved it to the fridge magnet, then back again, like a decision being postponed in plain sight. On the morning of the wedding, I dressed in quiet resolve. Charcoal wrap dress, silver earrings I'd bought myself for turning 39. Hair pulled back, not too done. I packed a small clutch with tissues, lip balm, and a roll of mints. Just enough to pass as someone who belonged. The hotel was a glass-paneled oasis by the vineyard, slick with money and curated wildflowers. I walked past valets who didn't meet my eyes and found the vendor door tucked near the side kitchen. I stood there for a moment. I could still walk away. No one expected me, not really. Inside my purse was a folded note I'd written the night before. It said, "To the girl who stayed kind." I wasn't sure if I meant it for Callista or myself. The vendor door was heavy when I pulled it open. Beyond it, a hall, blank, beige, humming with refrigeration units and unseen workers. A faint scent of rosemary and baking yeast drifted from somewhere deeper inside. My heels clicked once, twice, then stopped. Am I family, or just an outsider in nice shoes? No one looked twice as I entered through the service door. That was the plan, wasn't it? The hinges creaked only slightly, freshly oiled, I guessed. But the sound still made my shoulders flinch. Inside, the hallway was dimly lit and smelled of lemon polish and cold tile. The kind of scent that always reminded me of backstage school recitals, where I held props while Callista took bows. Simone stood just past the loading dock, her phone tucked into her ear, clipboard already outstretched toward me, without eye contact. "Timeline's in there," she murmured, then added, "Thank you," as if I were one of the catering interns. Maybe I was. I took the clipboard and nodded. It felt oddly right in my hands. Mom always said I was good at organizing, at filling in the gaps. Once, in high school, I juggled being class secretary and set designer for the spring musical. I had both the clipboard and the paintbrush. Callista had the spotlight, and Mom only bragged about the spotlight. I stepped further into the venue, careful not to let my heels echo too loudly. The estate had been converted. Wine barrels now held floral arrangements. White drapery softened the beams. Somewhere outside, a jazz quartet played the kind of music that sounded expensive without trying too hard. Guests floated past in shades of champagne and garnet, laughter bubbling like the Prosecco in their flutes. No one looked twice at me. Maybe it was the clipboard. Maybe it was the way I hugged the edge of the room. Near a cluster of stacked floral crates, I paused to take in the space. Callista had done well. Everything gleamed, each detail curated, like her Instagram feed brought to life. I saw a distant aunt, Dad's cousin, I think, pause mid-step, her brow wrinkling as she glanced toward me. A flicker of recognition. Then she turned away without a word. In the hallway leading to the ballroom, framed photos lined the wall. Childhood shots blown up, framed in brushed gold. All of Callista. Her as a toddler with cake smeared on her cheeks. Callista in her pageant sash, Callista in cap and gown, in corporate blazer, in ski gear with Dad. I scanned every frame twice. I wasn't in any of them. I moved to the side, hands now sweating against the clipboard, and watched Simone adjust a projector near the stage. A slideshow began. Callista through the years. Baby steps to boardrooms. There was one where she stood by the lemonade stand we'd built together when we were 9 and 7. My shoulder was cropped out. A woman in heels and a wide-brimmed hat stopped beside me. "You're the one who designed the logo, right?" she asked, pointing at the elegant swirl on the welcome banner. I hesitated, then smiled politely. "Something like that." She moved on without waiting for a name. The restroom offered a moment of silence. Cool marble, soft lighting, distant scent of lavender mist sprayed too liberally. I entered a stall and exhaled. From the lounge area, voices filtered through. "No, she moved out years ago," one said. "After that thing with the family business, remember?" A second voice. "Callista said she wanted to keep the wedding drama-free, smart girl." I didn't wait to hear more. Back outside, I passed a catering table where a valet manager squinted at me. "You're with support?" he asked. I nodded. What else was there to say? I wandered toward the reception room and found the seating chart. A grand glass frame perched on an easel. Names written in soft calligraphy. Callista's friends, her fiancé's colleagues, extended family in neat clusters. I traced each section twice, then 3 times. No Odellis, no +1, no placeholder. There was, however, a small section titled Corporate Guests, a generic catch-all. No names, just a block of seats. I backed away, pulse in my throat. Near the floor, something fluttered. A name card, crushed at the edge of a floral stand. I crouched, smoothing the paper between my fingers. The original name had been scratched out. In its place, someone had written in rushed ink, "Support Staff." I stared at it longer than I should have. I picked up a name card from the ground, smudged. Not mine. But it says, "Support Staff." Someone scratched out the original name. The tree was fake, but the leaves were real. Paper, handwritten. Guests wrote blessings. None were for me. It stood just beyond the patio, illuminated by golden string lights that swung lazily in the breeze. A memory tree, they called it. An art installation with purpose. At its base sat a woven basket filled with pastel paper leaves and fountain pens. I stood there a full minute before stepping closer, uncertain what I was hoping to find. The paper rustled like autumn under a slow wind. Most of the messages were lighthearted. Inside jokes, heartfelt thank yous, wishes for endless love. A few, though, echoed phrases that made my stomach twist. "From the original vision," one leaf read. Another. "We always knew this idea would change things." I leaned in. No names, no initials, just quotes that felt lifted from old meeting notes I remembered writing. Simone bustled past behind me, nearly brushing my shoulder. I turned to greet her, but she didn't stop. The clipboard she once handed me had vanished. Her hands were empty now, busy, distracted. I stared at one leaf in particular. The handwriting matched mine, but only because it was mine. Not fresh ink, but a reprint. The phrasing was identical to a line I'd written years ago in a draft brochure. From kitchen table to community impact. I remembered fretting over the word impact, circling it twice with a gel pen while Dad watched March Madness in the den. I sat by the fireplace that night, embroidering the corners of a quilt square. He hadn't said much, just reached over and rested a hand on my shoulder, like punctuation for a sentence we never spoke aloud. Back in the present, the buzz of conversation rose around me. Glasses clinked, and the scent of truffle canapes drifted through the night air. Colleen, a former mentor and major donor, approached with a surprised tilt of her head. "Odellis, I didn't see your name on the project site. I assumed you'd moved on." "I didn't," I said softly. "At least, not willingly." She looked puzzled, then awkward. "I always remembered that napkin sketch, the one from the cafe meeting in 18. Such a raw idea." My breath caught. "You mean the one with the concentric circles?" "Yes, that one." I hesitated. "That was mine. I drew it on a coffee receipt." Colleen blinked. "Callista said it was hers." "Of course she did." She offered a sympathetic smile, but it wavered. "Well, credit's a slippery thing, I suppose." Then she excused herself and melted into the crowd. I stood by the dessert table, arms folded tighter than necessary. The sky had turned navy, and the string lights flickered with the first tug of evening chill. A staffer passed by with a basket of quilted throws for guests. I reached instinctively and pulled one close. The fabric brushed my wrist, and I froze. The embroidery at the edge, small, nearly hidden, was a series of stitched dots and curves. My signature. Have you ever found something with your name on it, but realized it no longer belongs to you? If you've ever seen your own contributions paraded without acknowledgement, leave a comment number 8 below. Now, let's see what else they tried to hide. A habit I'd developed in college. The stitching was mine. This throw had once been part of my personal set, something I donated years ago to help stage one of Callista's early launches. And now it was part of the ambiance. Cozy, charming, anonymous. A woman in emerald silk drifted beside me, looking at the throw in my hands. "Lovely touch," she said, sipping her champagne. "Feels so personal, doesn't it?" I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. I moved toward a quiet corner, away from the chattering clusters. From here, I could see the entire setup. The string lights, the curated wine barrels, the welcome board with Callista's legacy painted in soft brush script. Every piece had my fingerprints, and none had my name. I caught Simone again, near the sound booth. She was adjusting something on the screen, her movements brisk. She looked up, saw me, and turned quickly. It wasn't shyness, it was avoidance. Like even eye contact might give something away. I leaned on the edge of a high table, watching a tray of macarons disappear under guests' eager fingers. I remembered baking those with Callista once, back when our idea was still a whisper and we still made mistakes we could laugh about, before it became her show. A soft bell chimed from the far end of the lawn. Someone tapped the microphone near the arbor. Callista appeared, radiant in her second gown, prepared to deliver yet another curated speech. Behind her, a projection screen flickered to life. Someone announces a slideshow of Callista's legacy. The first image is the logo I drew. No credit. I wasn't listed in the acknowledgments, not in the speech, not in the toast, but they used my words, line by line. The ballroom shimmered under a soft wash of amber light. Gilded sconces flickered against velvet drapes, and the scent of melting vanilla candles mingled with rosewater and roasted duck. Dessert forks clinked against porcelain, laughter floated like confetti, and I sat motionless at the far end of the room, an echo in a celebration that pretended I'd never existed. Callista stood beneath a halo of spotlight, her gown catching the light like spun glass. She looked effortless, curated down to the tremble in her voice. "This journey began," she said, with a question no one knew how to answer. "What if family could become legacy?" The room hushed. I knew that line. I'd written it for our grant proposal 4 years ago, curled on my couch, with a lukewarm latte and a throbbing headache. Every pause, every cadence she used tonight was practiced, but not by her. They were mine. She spoke of vision and resilience, of belief when belief was all we had. I waited for the names, for mine, for a flicker of acknowledgement. She thanked our earliest supporters, the brave first clients, the ones who never let her forget why she started. None of them were me. My hands were folded in my lap, stiff as pressed linen. Across the room, I glimpsed Simone behind the sound booth, eyes averted, lips pressed tight. She adjusted the slideshow remote, though nothing was playing. Her body language screamed invisibility. Then the screen lit up, images flickering. Callista in a dusty garage, our supposed first meeting. The table was cropped. My chair, my sketches, erased. One slide showed a close-up of a design board we'd built together, the frame cut just above my initials. The applause swelled. Guests nodded at the clever wording, the elegance of her origin myth. I pressed my thumb into the palm of my hand to stop it from shaking. A movement caught my eye. Lucas. He leaned forward slightly, brows furrowed. He glanced at me, just once. Not pity, not surprise. Recognition. But before I could hold that gaze, he looked away. Callista's speech reached its crescendo. To those who paved the path, thank you. And to those who stood in my way, I forgive you. A polite ripple of laughter. I tasted metal in the back of my mouth. I tried to stand, to slip out unnoticed, but the carpet betrayed me. My heel caught in the seam near the table's edge. It wasn't a fall, just enough of a stumble for a hush to fall over our corner of the room. Chairs turned, my face burned. Callista paused. Her eyes locked onto mine, expression unreadable, except for the hint of satisfaction flickering behind her lashes. She tilted her head slightly. And lastly, to those who taught me what not to be, thank you. Applause erupted. My heart doesn't. I stepped back into the shadows, jaw tight, hands cold despite the warmth of the room. The clapping roared around me. My mother, sitting 2 rows ahead, brought a hand to her mouth, teary, delighted. She didn't turn to look at me, not once. And yet, somehow, that absence of a glance was louder than 1,000 eyes. I stood there for another moment, long enough to see Callista's smile fade as she accepted a glass of champagne. She didn't glance my way again. Neither did Simone, who now busied herself folding a cloth napkin with desperate precision. Near the exit, a staff member brushed past me with a tray of espresso cups. I nearly knocked one over. He didn't apologize. Why would he? I reached for my coat. The hallway beyond the ballroom was quieter, lit by antique sconces and drowsy with the scent of old wood polish. My fingers fumbled with the buttons, clumsy with cold and something heavier. That's when I heard him. "Odellis," Lucas said gently. I turned. He stepped forward, coat over one arm, bow tie slightly loosened. His voice had none of the crowd's rehearsed tones. "You were never invisible to me." It was buried in a Dropbox folder named Archive Old. I wasn't supposed to see it, but she'd used my login years ago and forgot to change it. Rain tapped the windows like a soft metronome, counting the seconds I'd lost to silence over the years. I hadn't planned to open my laptop that morning. Not really. I just sat at my desk, fingers idle near the trackpad, eyes drifting to the half-finished glass of wine from the night before. The bitter tannin hung in the air like a question, but curiosity— no, not curiosity. Hunger. That hunger for certainty pulled me toward the screen. My fingers moved on their own, muscle memory typing in credentials Callista once insisted we share for consistency. I'd meant to change it, But like so many things, it had fallen into the category of not worth the trouble. And there it was. Archive Old. A folder with a modified date just after my final presentation with her, when I had still believed in the concept of hours. Inside, a cascade of files opened like a wound. Logos, slide decks, sketches. Names had been changed. My name, gone. But Lucas had warned me. His message had come late the night before, short and unassuming. You deserve to know. I saved everything. It had taken me a few seconds to respond, longer to let it sink in. Now I dragged his folder next to hers. It was like watching a before and after surgery. Her polish over my raw notes, my bullets reworded into her cadence. One file caught my eye. Brochure 3 draft. I clicked. There, highlighted in pale yellow, were comments. Nice phrasing, O. Fix this later. O's version stronger. A pang hit somewhere between my throat and my chest. I scrolled further. A napkin scan. My handwriting. The timestamp read May 19th, almost a full year before Callista stood on a stage and declared it her late-night revelation. I should have felt rage. But mostly, I felt numb. Then something stranger, a letter. Colleen's letterhead. Addressed to a fellowship board. Recommendation. For me. Warm, generous, full of conviction. But the file properties showed it had never been emailed. Instead, it was copied to a folder named Simone Review. I sat back, eyes stinging. The silence in the room didn't feel peaceful anymore. It pressed in like fog. I picked up the wine glass, stared through its dark contents, and put it down untouched. Lucas called. Did you find the activity log? His voice was careful, like he didn't want to push. Not yet, I murmured. Check mid-June, last year. I navigated through Dropbox's back end, my hands colder than they should have been. And there it was. Simone's user ID. Downloaded everything I'd ever uploaded, hours before the patent was filed. My heart knocked against my ribs once, then again, harder. Have you ever uncovered the truth, so clearly, so painfully, that you didn't know whether to scream or stay silent? If you've ever held the proof and still felt powerless, leave a comment number 9 below. Let's see what I chose next. Before I could respond to Lucas's quiet question, a memory rose, unprompted. We were maybe 16, helping Dad organize his old garage shelves. Callista had stayed inside, claiming allergies. I had crouched beside Lucas, sorting screws and bolts into mismatched jars. He'd said, "If this were a startup, you'd be the brain." I remember laughing it off, but he hadn't laughed. "No, I mean it," he'd added, serious in that teenage awkward way. "You see the stuff no one else does." That stuck. Now, years later, that same voice said across the line, "Even then I knew." It undid something in me, a knot I didn't know I'd tightened. "Are you okay?" Lucas asked. "I don't know," I said. "I don't think I've been okay for a long time." There was a pause. "You want to pursue this?" I stared at the messenger screen long before typing. My fingers hovered, retreated, hovered again. Maybe I hoped she'd call first, offer some half-confession I could at least pretend to believe. But nothing came. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat, so I wrote the only thing that held weight. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened a blank email window, typed Callista's name, then deleted it. I moved to Messenger, shorter, colder. "Want to talk? I have everything." The message sent with a barely audible ping. Seconds passed. Then, seen, and nothing else. That was it. No apology, no outrage. Just the quiet arrogance of someone who always counted on me staying quiet. I leaned back in my chair, the sound of rain now joined by the dull thud of my heartbeat. And as I sat there, memory slipped in. One I hadn't invited. My 12th birthday. Callista had handed me a small wrapped box, neat corners, navy ribbon. I'd torn it open, breath caught with hope. Inside, nothing. "It's for your future ideas," she'd said, smiling. "You'll fill it." I had smiled back then, too, thinking it was clever that she believed in me. I see now it was practice, conditioning, learning to take nothing and call it a gift. But today, I had names, files, timestamps, a digital trail no velvet speech could erase. She didn't respond. But that silence said more than 1,000 apologies could. The message sat there, unread for hours. Then seen. And still nothing. I stared at it again that morning as I opened the blinds in my small home office. Sunlight filtered in slowly, drawing pale lines across the floor. I let it warm my face. The quiet hum of the street outside reminded me that life had moved on, and maybe, finally, so had I. Rain had passed overnight, leaving behind the smell of damp pavement and jasmine. I brewed a weak pot of coffee. Nothing fancy, just Folgers and a splash of almond milk. It tasted like relief. On the table sat a printed flyer, one I'd made myself. Women Who Build, a workshop for the overlooked. My name, right there on the bottom, in full. No abbreviation, no shared credit. The community center wasn't big. A folding room with metal chairs and a carpet that smelled faintly of bleach and old ambition. But they came. 10, maybe 12 women. Some older, some barely out of school. All of them carried the same look I once wore. Quiet hope mixed with exhaustion. Lucas was already there, laying out handouts on each seat. He gave me a small smile as I entered. "I told you they'd listen eventually." I smiled back, steadying the stack of notes in my hands. Eventually still counts. We began simply. I opened with a memory. "I once gave a whole campaign away without knowing it," I said. A few heads nodded. One woman, in a green blazer, wiped her eye. They understood. Not the details, maybe, but the sensation, the erasure, the ache of watching your work flourish in someone else's name. As I spoke, I noticed a woman sitting near the back, scribbling quickly into a notebook. She wore a press badge, local paper, small-town journalism still existed, and today I welcomed it. Someone asked, "How did you find your voice?" I paused, looking at the flyer again. I stopped trying to be included and started building the room I wanted to be in. The woman in the green blazer clapped first. Others followed. Not loudly, just enough to say, "We're with you." During a break, I walked out into the hallway. The air was warmer there, softer. A small community board listed upcoming events: bingo night, free tax help, potluck for new moms. It felt humble, real. Lucas joined me. He held out a small, creased envelope. "I thought this got lost," he said. Inside was the napkin sketch, the original one. My handwriting, my shapes, the birth of a logo now famous under someone else's name. "I found it taped in an old notebook," he added. "Didn't even realize it was still there." I stared at it for a long while. My hands shook slightly as I turned it over. The edges softened from time and oil. Back inside, I pinned it to the corkboard we used for session notes. I didn't say anything for a moment. Just let the paper settle, the corners curl naturally. Then I said, clearly and calmly, "If you've ever been written out, let this be your first page." After the session ended, a few women stayed behind. One, a retired postal worker named Geraldine, approached me slowly, holding a flyer in her hand like it was a fragile heirloom. "I never thought I'd come to something like this," she said, voice trembling. "But you reminded me that I mattered once." I want to matter again. We stood there for a moment, two women from different ends of life, united by the simple desire to be seen. I gave her my card. My own card, not one Callista designed or signed off on. Later that evening, I found myself sitting on the back steps of the center, the sky turning orange-pink above the roofs of parked cars. Lucas joined me with 2 paper cups of coffee from the vending machine. It was terrible, but perfect. "I think your dad would have been proud," he said after a long silence. I smiled faintly, remembering the quiet dignity in Dad's eyes when I once showed him a simple fabric design in middle school. He hadn't said much, just nodded and said, "It's yours. Don't let them take it." I finally understood what he meant. Back inside, I began gathering the flyers left behind. One of them had a note scrawled in the margin. "Thank you for saying what we don't know how to." I kept it. Before we left, I took one last look around the room. It wasn't grand. There were no crystal chandeliers, no curated speeches, no designer dresses. But there was truth. And there was my name, still pinned to the board beside the napkin sketch. This time, no one could crop it out. Some days, I still catch myself rehearsing the words I wish I'd said in that ballroom. But most days, I let the silence speak for itself. I've come to believe that truth doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes, it shows up quietly, tired, but certain. And in claiming my voice, not to shout, but to simply exist, I learned that not every legacy is about being remembered. Sometimes, it's about being at peace with what you know. If my story stirred something in you, maybe take a breath today, for the version of yourself that was once overlooked. Thank you for listening. Please consider subscribing if this resonated with you. See you in the next story.